A murder masked by silence, but one scent betrayed the killer. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Tell me, where in the world are you joining us from today? Hearing from you always brings a smile to my day. Let's begin. I have always maintained that if a man can ruin my breakfast before I've had my second cup of coffee, he ought to be arrested for domestic terrorism. And in Nero Wolfe's brownstone, where routine is religion and ritual is God, that principle ought to be carved into the limestone above the front door. So when the doorbell rang at 9:16 a.m., well within what Wolfe calls the sanctum of digestion, I knew we were in for one of two things: a very insistent courier or a client too rich or too stubborn to wait for the civilized hour of 11. Fritz had just served Wolfe his soft-boiled eggs with a wedge of brioche and a dash of Westphalian salt when the bell hit. Wolfe looked up as if someone had spit in his beer, and I got the eyebrow, the one that says, "Pfui, get rid of it." I put my toast down, wiped my fingers, and made my way to the door. When I opened it, I saw a man in a suit that cost too much and fit too little, standing there with the expression of someone trying very hard not to appear desperate. He had a thin mustache, the kind that wants to be elegant but ends up looking unemployed, and his hair was slicked back in a style I associate with 1930s newsreels and modern regret. "Mr. Goodwin?" he asked, glancing behind me into the hall like he expected it to explode. "That's what my wallet says. You are?" "Dr. Brian Merritt." Look, I know it's early, but I'm afraid I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe immediately." "Are you bleeding, poisoned, or followed by the police?" "No, I'm being haunted." That got him an extra 10 seconds on the stoop. "He doesn't do ghosts," I said. "Not even for triple his fee. Try the Society for Psychical Research or the Vatican." He leaned in, lowering his voice to a whisper. "It's not a ghost, it's a hot dog cart. Now, there are words a man expects to hear in a lifetime. You're the father. You have the right to remain silent. You've won a trip to Aruba, but it's a hot dog cart is not one of them. Especially not from a man who sounded like he once lectured at Yale and smelled like an anxiety attack." He took a step closer. "Please, just 5 minutes. I think someone is trying to kill my business, or my reputation, or both, and I believe Mr. Wolfe is the only man who can help me." I studied him for a second. There was sweat behind his ears, a tremble in his fingertips, and a briefcase he was clinging to like it contained plutonium or blackmail material. "Possibly both. Wait here," I said. "And don't touch the hydrangeas. Wolfe takes it personal." I padded back through the hall and into the dining room. Wolfe, of course, was chewing with the solemn concentration of a man dismantling a French treaty. I waited until the last bite was down. "Wolfe," I said, "you'll want to hear this. 1, the man says he's being haunted." He didn't look up. "Nonsense. By a hot dog cart." That got a twitch of the eyebrow, not both, just one, which in Wolfe speak is roughly equivalent to a man leaping to his feet and yelling, "Egad!" "A prank," he said. "He's a doctor, well-dressed, nervous as a hemophiliac in a bar fight." "What kind of doctor?" "Says his name is Brian Merritt. Didn't get his field." Wolfe sighed. 5 minutes in the office, which is how a hot dog cart got past the most exclusive threshold in Manhattan. I brought Merritt in, sat him in the red chair, and took my usual position near the desk, ready to play stenographer and field monkey, depending on Wolfe's mood. Wolfe looked at him like one would regard an unscheduled opera singer at lunch. "Explain yourself," he said. Merritt opened his case and pulled out a photograph. He placed it gently on Wolfe's blotter. "This is the cart. 3 weeks ago it appeared outside my new restaurant, Dr. Dog on 12th and Carmine. Every morning since it's been there. Same man, same uniform, same smell of old grease and onions. But here's the thing, we've had it removed. Twice. Once by city order. The next day it returns. We've had confrontations, threats, even lawyers. And yet, Wolfe said dryly, the Spectre sells sausages. Merritt leaned forward. Not just sausages, my sausages, my recipes, my branding, the exact menu. Someone's copied it, perfectly, and they're giving it away for free. I blinked. Wolfe didn't. Free? Wolfe repeated. You're saying this phantom vendor is distributing gourmet hot dogs for no compensation? Exactly. Wolfe made a noise like a sleeping bear exhaling. Preposterous. I thought so too. Until yesterday, we received an anonymous letter. He handed it over. It said you stole the flavor, now the flavor will consume you. Wolfe studied the note. Typed. Cheap paper. Smelled of cheap ink. A little grease along the fold. So you believe, Wolfe said slowly, that you are being targeted by a culinary poltergeist with a personal grudge and a poetic flair. Merritt stiffened. I believe someone is trying to ruin me. And I think, for they have intimate knowledge of my work, possibly from inside my own kitchen. My investors are spooked. My chef is threatening to quit, and I am being humiliated. Why not go to the police? Merritt swallowed. I did. They laughed. Wolfe closed his eyes. I could hear the gears turning, slow and heavy like cathedral. Bells, Archie, he said. Get Mr. Merritt a glass of water, then take down the names of everyone with access to his recipes, kitchen, and staff records. We will entertain this ridiculous charade, for now. I didn't grin, but I might have. Let one corner of my mouth twitch. Because Wolfe, for all his disdain, had taken the bait. The game, sausage-scented and all, was on. You could count on one hand the number of people Nero Wolfe allows into the brownstone without a formal appointment, and most of them are either delivery men or orchid smugglers. Dr. Brian Merritt wasn't either, but he'd cracked the sanctum before lunch, on the strength of an absurdity wrapped in mystery, seasoned with ego. That's all it takes sometimes. Once Merritt had downed his water and scribbled out a list of names in a hand so neat it made my own look like cave etchings, I escorted him out with a promise that we'd be in touch. Which in Wolfe terms meant we'll think about thinking about it. When I returned to the office, Wolfe hadn't moved a centimeter. His fingertips were pressed together like he was praying to the gods of deduction, or possibly asking them why the hell they'd cursed. Him with another client who used adjectives like haunted. Size too earnest for deception, Wolfe said, eyes still closed. Unless that's the trick, I said. Maybe the whole thing's a smokescreen. Free hot dogs from beyond the grave. Sounds like a front for something less mustardy. Wolfe opened one eye. Cynicism is a vulgar refuge. So is poetry in ransom notes. You think he's telling the truth? I think, Wolfe murmured. Someone has found an unorthodox way to assault a man's reputation. And that, Mr. Goodwin, is a form of murder. He reached for the list. 5 names in neat print: Lucia Panetti, Executive Chef Tom Bran, Line Cook Shira Lang, Marketing Director Max Hollow, Business Partner Kelvin Trask, Former Intern, fired 2 months ago. Wolfe grunted. 5 suspects, 3 with culinary. Access, 2 with financial stakes, 1 with a grudge, acceptable. You really think one of them is giving out free dogs for revenge? I think someone is engineering a collapse. Free distribution of a mirrored menu at the point of origin is not sabotage. It is public humiliation. A personal assault. You mean someone's messing with his brand? Wolfe waved a hand. Do not degrade the matter with marketing parlance. He closed his eyes again, steepled fingers back in place. Archie, I require you to visit this, Dr. Dog. Hot dogs for breakfast, what a world. He grunted. And observe, Wolfe continued, discreetly. I want to know who lingers near the cart, what it smells like, who eats, who doesn't. Interview the staff, preferably without provoking legal action. I stood, stretched, and grabbed my hat. You know, if someone was killed by a haunted Frankfurter, this would be a much easier sell. He didn't respond. Wolfe rarely does when I'm... Right. I headed out through the front door, already planning my route. First stop, Carmine Street. Then a few awkward interviews. Some surveillance and possibly indigestion. Back inside, the brownstone began to quiet again, but not for long, because at 3:17 that afternoon, the doorbell rang a second time. This time it was Fritz who answered. A minute later, he appeared in the office doorway looking like someone had just insulted his veal stock. A woman, he said, insists she has a delivery for Mr. Wolfe. She will not say what. Wolfe sighed without looking up. Archie is out, I told her, Fritz said. She still insists. Wolfe shifted in his chair. Not much, just enough for a man who despises motion to register disapproval. Very well, send her in, parafo. Moment later, the woman entered. And I do mean entered. Not crept, shuffled, or politely stepped. She had the kind of confidence that walks ahead of a person like a red carpet. Early 40s, crisp grey suit, eyes sharp enough to julienne radish. She held a paper bag the size of a lunch order, but treated it like it contained evidence. You are Nero Wolfe. I am. My name is Shira Lang. I work for Dr. Merritt. Wolfe inclined his head. I recall the name. She placed the bag on his desk. Someone left this at our office half an hour ago, addressed to you, with a note that said, if he won't come to the cart, let the cart come to him. She opened the bag. Inside, wrapped in butcher paper, was a hot dog, perfectly constructed, the bun fresh, the sausage plump, onions glistening, relish arranged like it had been laid by tweezers. Wolfe regarded it like one might regard a small explosive. I thought you'd want to see it, she said, before we threw it away. Wolfe didn't speak. He reached forward, slowly, and picked up the dog with 2 fingers. Then he smelled it. Then he frowned. Then he did something I had never seen him do with a hot dog in 20 years. He took a bite, just one. Chewed, swallowed, paused. Missy Lang, he said. Who else has tasted this? No one, I think. Good. Then no one else knows. Knows what? Wolfe placed the dog gently back in its wrapper. That it's better than his. Lang stared at him. Excuse me? Thank you, that will be all. And just like that, she was dismissed. When the door closed behind her, Wolfe spoke softly, as if to himself. Someone has not merely copied his menu, Mr. Goodwin, he said. Eyes narrowed. They've improved it. I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in guilt, grudges, and gimmicks. And whatever was haunting Dr. Merritt's fancy hot dog operation on Carmine Street, it wasn't spectral. It was strategic. By the time I arrived at Dr. Dog, the lunch rush was in full swing. It was one of those upscale street food joints that New Yorkers either love or pretend to love to avoid looking square. Brushed steel counters, minimalist font on the signage, and servers in monochrome uniforms looking bored enough to be in a gallery exhibit. What caught the eye more than the storefront, though, was the cart. Not 10 feet from the door, parked, defiantly on the curb, sat a perfectly average-looking hot dog stand, umbrella slightly frayed, steam curling from a vent, and a line 5 deep of locals scarfing down dogs like they were made of filet mignon and sin. The man behind the cart was mid-40s, thick-necked, with skin like overcooked dough and a jaw that jutted like it owed someone money. He moved with practiced ease, slapping buns and slinging condiments. His apron read, "Dogs don't lie." I'd seen a lot of marketing slogans. That one had bite. I approached the stand from the far side and observed customers paid nothing. There wasn't even a tip jar. They took their dog, gave a nod, and left looking faintly smug. A few glanced at the restaurant as they passed. One muttered, "This is the real deal." I made my way into Dr. Dog with my best, concerned customer, face and a stomach full of skepticism. Inside it was all tension wrapped in truffle oil. The staff moved quickly, but there was an edge to it, the kind of hyper-politeness that says management is watching and nerves afraid. I flashed a smile at the hostess and asked to speak with the manager. After a brief radioed consultation, I was led back through the kitchen, where everything was steel sweat and silent panic. Lucia Panetti was waiting in a narrow office behind the walk-in. Executive chef, age 42 according to Merit's list, with a reputation for innovation and 3 tattoos barely hidden by her sleeves. She wore her authority like armor and looked at me like I was trying to sell her a vacuum cleaner during service. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. "We were told you might come." That gave me a slight pause. "Merit warned you off?" She gave a shrug. "Dr. Merit is not subtle, but if you're here to help, I'll talk. Briefly." I took the offered chair. "So let's cut to it. Who do you think is behind the cart?" She laughed once, short and sharp. "Is that a real question?" "I'm full of those." She leaned forward. "I think someone's trying to hurt him, hurt us. The recipe's being copied. That's no coincidence. I spent months with Merit perfecting those dogs, and now they're on the street. And free? That's not business. That's vengeance. From inside. Has to be." No one else had full access to the recipe files. "Files? We run digital records of all product tests, spreadsheets, flavor trials, inventory logs. Someone with a login could have pulled it." I made a note. "Who had that access?" "Me. Merit. Shearer. Max, maybe. Kelvin didn't. He was just an intern." "But he was fired." Lucia's face twitched. "For good reason." I waited. She sighed. "He was caught photographing prep notes after hours. Said it was for his portfolio. Merit didn't buy it. Fired him on the spot. Made a show of it. Grudge potential? Grudge certainty. Did. He ever come back?" "Once." 2 weeks later, just stood outside staring through the window, didn't say a word. I made another note. Wolfe would want the boy tailed. I had Saul Panzer on speed dial for just such a grudge-bearing former. In turn, I thanked Lucia and left her with a nod. As I made my way out, I stopped by the marketing office, a cold glass box near the front of the building with one nervous occupant tapping furiously at a laptop. Shira Lang. She looked up, registered me, and gave a tired smile. "Merit said you might snoop around." "Snoop is such an unkind word. I prefer inquisitive investigator." She closed her laptop. "So, what do you want to know?" "How long has the cart been there?" "Since opening day. We thought it was coincidence. First week we were too busy to panic. Second week we filed complaints. Nothing happened. Week 3, it started giving away food." I raised an eyebrow. "And no one's tried to stop him?" "Legally, yes. Physically, no. We're not going to attack a food cart in broad daylight. Merit wanted to, believe me. I talked him down. That must have been fun. He doesn't listen, not to me anyway. He listens to Max sometimes. I made a mental note to bump Max up the priority list. "How's business?" Her lips thinned. "Tanking. The food blogs have latched onto the ghost dog story. Everyone loves a rebel vendor, especially one they don't have to pay." "Any theories?" She hesitated. "Max hollow. He's slick, but he hates being out of control. Merit kept overriding him. New ideas, new branding. Max said the concept was too pretentious. Said we should lean into nostalgia, not science." "Did he walk?" "No. But he checked out. Barely shows up now. Last week he said he had a family thing. He's been remote ever since." "Where was he when the cart started giving away food?" "Supposedly Florida. I didn't see a boarding pass." "Interesting. It always comes back to ego. Max might have been the money, but Merit was the brand. And when you're funding someone's genius, that kind of thing festers." I thanked her, got a business card, and left through the side exit to avoid the scent of grilling betrayal out front. Back in my car, I called Wolfe. "Well," he grumbled, "we've got 5 suspects, and 4 of them have motive. Chef Lucia is loyal but bitter. Shearer's too. Tired to lie but suspicious of Max. Max is absent and annoyed. And Kelvin, our intern, is a walking recipe theft with a front row seat to Merritt's ego. And the vendor? Won't speak, just cooks. I'll tail him tomorrow or put Saul on him tonight. Wolfe grunted. Return immediately. Why? I am disturbed. That, from Nero Wolfe, is equivalent to DEFCON 3. When Wolfe says, he's disturbed, it doesn't mean he's pacing the carpet in a panic. It means his mind has latched onto a thread, and he won't rest until he pulls it through the needle and stitches together a solution that makes the rest of us feel like kindergartners with finger paints. So when I returned to the brownstone, coat off and notebook bulging, I found him in the office, still in his chair, of course, eyes closed, lips pressed, and the remains of the infamous hot dog sitting under a glass cloche, like it was a crime. Scene exhibit. He opened his eyes as I entered. You've seen the suspects? 3 of them. Lucia the chef, Shearer the spin master, and enough of Max to know he's currently missing in inaction. Kelvin, the intern, I haven't tracked yet. Saul's on him tonight, Wolfe nodded faintly. Good, the perpetrator has flair. That's not exactly comforting. No, but it is illuminating. Anyone with the means and nerve to replicate a proprietary product and give it away on the adversary's doorstep is not acting on impulse. This is personal, planned, and, crucially, precise. I sat and opened my notes. Chef Lucia says the digital files could have been copied. She mentioned inventory spreadsheets, test notes, flavor logs. Accessible by? Her, Shearer, Merritt, possibly Max. Kelvin had no credentials, but he was caught snapping photos. Wolfe grunted. He is essential. Which is why Saul's on his tail as we speak. Goodwin, tomorrow you will visit him. I want to know where he lives, what he reads, and whether he has the face of a saboteur. You want a surveillance report or a personality profile? I want both. And while you're at it, I want you to revisit the cart vendor. I blinked. The man you said was beneath consideration. He may not be the instigator, but he is clearly an instrument. He must be benefiting. No man gives away high-quality sausages out of altruism. You're underestimating the self-destructive kindness of New Yorkers. He gave me a look like I'd just suggested we plant roses in the kitchen. Go then. Interview the dog slinger. With tact, if possible. Tactful sausage interrogation, my specialty. The next morning, after a strong cup of Fritz's coffee and a slice of walnut bread, I headed to the West Village. The cart was there. Right. On schedule, its owner steaming up the sidewalk with precision. No name tag, no signage, no music, just sizzling meat, the whiff of onions, and a line of early lunchers. I waited until the line cleared before stepping up. Morning, I said. Nice day for free meat. He looked at me. Not hostile, not friendly, just there. You want a dog or not? Depends what's in it. Same thing that's in every other dog in this town, only better. Yeah, I've heard. Question is, why free? He reached for a bun. Promotion. Of what? He shrugged. Flavor. That's a tough business model. I'm not in business, I'm in legacy. That stopped me. Come again. He handed me the dog. You wouldn't understand. Try me. He paused, wiped his hands, then leaned on the cart. Just a little. Let's just say there's more to life than turning everything into a brand. People used to make food because they loved it. Now it's logos, investors, verticals. I'm giving something back. And who are you giving it back for? He didn't answer. He just looked at me with tired eyes and a history I wasn't invited into. You know a guy named Kelvin Trask? His eyes flicked. Just a second. Never heard of him. Too fast. I took the dog, nodded thanks, and backed away. As I crossed the E Street, I pulled out my phone and rang Saul. Tell me you've got something on the kid. Saul's voice came through like sandpaper wrapped in competence. Kelvin's holed up in an apartment in Bushwick. Shared loft. Artist types. Doesn't go out much. He's been ordering a lot of groceries through a third-party vendor. Specialty stuff. Sausage casings, pickling vinegar, Bavarian mustard. Cooking experiments or replication. Anyone visiting? 2 so far. One matches a description of Lucia Panetti. The other might be Max Hollow, but I need confirmation. Max. Visited Kelvin. Possibly. That changes things. Keep watching. I'm heading over. Kelvin's building was the kind of place that smells like paint thinner and unfinished ambition. I buzzed the top floor. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. I was about to call, saw when the door creaked open. Someone leaving. A tall girl in leggings and boots nodded at me absently as she passed. I caught the door with my foot and slipped inside. The hallway was narrow, dim, and humming with music from 3 different directions. I climbed to the 4th floor, found the unit Saul had named, and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Finally, the door opened a crack. Kelvin Trask had the look of someone who hadn't slept in a few days. Eyes rimmed red, hair tousled, hands stained with what looked like turmeric or paprika. Yes? Kelvin, I'm Archie Goodwin. I work with Nero Wolfe. I don't know who that is. You will. Mind if I ask you a few questions? I do, actually. I held up a photo. 1. I'd snapped earlier of the hot dog from the cart. You recognize this? His eyes twitched. That's from the cart. You know which cart? No, I've seen it online. Funny. The vendor claims he's giving something back. You know what that means? Kelvin said nothing. I took a chance. Is it your recipe? He froze. What if it is? Then we've got something to talk about. Because someone's hijacking your culinary manifesto and using it to bring down your former boss. He opened the door a little wider. You know what Merritt did to me. I know he fired you. I know he humiliated you. I know he's sweating. Bullets right now which you might consider justice. But what I don't know is this. Are you the ghost or are you someone else's puppet? His mouth opened, closed, then stayed shut. I want to help, I said quietly. But you've got to tell me the truth. Who else is involved? He whispered it. One name, then closed the door. I stood there a moment, then walked slowly back to the car. My phone buzzed. It was Wolfe. Report. I have a name. I have a link. And I have the smell of onions in my soul. Ready for the next. Move? There was a long pause. Yes, Wolfe said. Return immediately, the board is set. Wolfe didn't speak for a full 30 seconds after I gave him Kelvin's whispered confession. That might not seem like much, but in Wolfe time it was an epoch. He sat still in his chair, eyes half-lidded, index fingers pressed under his chin. He looked like a man trying to taste the ingredients of a lie. I stood, hands on my hips, replaying. The exchange with Kelvin in my mind. I'd left Bushwick with one name, Max Hollow. Apparently Kelvin wasn't just the wounded intern. He was the craftsman behind the cart's culinary resurrection. The problem was, he hadn't built it alone. He had help. And if he was telling the truth, that help came from inside the business, from Merritt's partner. I don't like it, I said finally. Kelvin has motive, sure, but Max Hollow doesn't exactly scream hot dog revolutionary. No, Wolfe murmured, but he screams resentment, and if he's not the architect, he may be the financier or the enabler. I don't see Max standing on a street corner slinging mustard for justice. So of course not, Wolfe snapped. He wouldn't dirty his cuffs, but he could provide resources, money, protection, a false trail. Wolfe turned his head toward the glass dome on the desk, the remains of the cart dog still intact beneath. Not a single fly dared approach. Fritz had sealed the dome himself after Wolfe's sample bite, and even now it looked as pristine as an exhibit in the Museum of Culinary Vengeance. You say the dog was exceptional, I said. He nodded. Balanced acidity, textural contrast, uncommon nuance for a food typically hurled through steam. Better than Merritt's. Unquestionably, I gave a low whistle. So Kelvin didn't just steal the recipe. He upgraded it. He perfected it, Wolfe said. The question is why? What end is served by excellence if it is given away? To humiliate, to mock, to haunt? Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Indeed. He reached slowly for his phone. Get Saul on the line. A minute later, Saul's voice rasped through the receiver. Mr. Panzer, Wolfe said, we need eyes. On Max Hollow. Start with financials. Off-books activity, private accounts. Look for payments, digital or otherwise, that lead to equipment purchases, food-grade carts, refrigeration units, permits. Saul grunted. Already on it. Found a shell. Corp registered to Hollow's cousin in Queens. Bought a vintage Sabrette cart last fall. Modified. Invoice matched a commissary rental in Red Hook. Send the documents to Archie. Anything else? One odd thing. Max withdrew $10,000 in cash last month. No clear reason. First time. He's touched that account in a year. Wolfe hung up without ceremony. Archie, tomorrow you'll visit that commissary kitchen. See if it connects. Meanwhile, we'll invite Mr. Merritt to visit us again. For what? A second helping of ghost dog? Wolfe smiled faintly. No, for baiting a trap. It was the next morning that I noticed it. A little thing, a barely there detail. Fritz was in the kitchen when I came down for breakfast, humming over a pan of eggs Florentine. But something in the air was wrong. A smell out of place, not strong but distinct, just enough to catch the nose before it evaporated like gossip. Something burning? I asked, sniffing. Fritz turned. No, everything's perfect. Why? I walked to the spice rack, a quiet temple of order, hundreds of jars alphabetized and chronologized like a botanical archive. I reached for the paprika. The jar was cold, too cold. I unscrewed the lid and took a sniff. Fritz, this paprika, it's been in the fridge. Fritz frowned. Certainly not. That would destroy the oils. Then someone moved it. He stepped forward, his expression tightening. That's impossible. No one touches this rack but me. Has anyone else been in here? No. We stared at the jar together like it had committed a felony. I think, I said slowly, we've been visited. Wolfe was in the dining room finishing his second helping of eggs and listening to the radio when I told him. A spice jar? He asked. Yes. Tampered? No sign of it. Just cold, as if someone handled it with gloves from a cooler. Wolfe looked toward the kitchen with visible irritation. Then we must assume that someone entered this house under false pretenses. I checked the front and back locks, I said. No sign of forced entry. Then they were invited. Or used. Subterfuge. Who was here yesterday? Wolfe tapped his fingers. Miss Lang delivered the cart dog. You interviewed the suspects. Fritz went shopping in the afternoon. No one else entered. Unless, I said, someone came in as someone else. Wolfe looked at me. Or returned while you were gone, with access. We both thought the name at the same time, Kelvin Trask. I didn't give him our address, I said. You didn't have to. He knows you work for me. He could have followed, or guessed, or been told. But what would he want in the kitchen? 2. Leave a mark, Wolfe said. Or a message. He stood up. Which, if you know Wolfe, tells you the world had shifted. He walked to the spice rack. He picked up the paprika, examined it, set it down. Then he turned and looked at me. Call. Merritt. Tell him to be here at noon and summon the rest, Lucia, Max, Shearer, and Kelvin. What about the vendor? Later. First, the players in this theater must be gathered. Under what pretense? Tell them the case is resolved. I paused. Is it? Almost, Wolfe said. But first I want to see them sweat. At 11:45, Fritz laid out the good china. By noon, the suspects had begun to arrive. Merritt came first, wearing a blazer that tried to project control and mostly succeeded in making him look overdressed for a funeral. Lucia followed, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. Shearer came next, quietly, composed. And at 12:15, just late enough to be deliberate, Max Hollow arrived, tan, sleek, and insincere, but the last guest of honor was the most reluctant. Kelvin Trask entered the brownstone like a man walking into his own trial. He didn't meet anyone's eyes. He sat where I pointed, hunched low in his chair. Wolfe surveyed them from behind his desk like Caesar contemplating gladiators. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you for coming. I believe we are nearing the conclusion of this unconventional affair." He looked at Kelvin. "But first, a small matter of domestic intrusion. Mr. Trask, did you enter this house yesterday?" Kelvin froze. "No." "Do not lie," Wolfe said with a sharpness that cracked like thunder. Kelvin looked down, then nodded. I just wanted to see his spices." "Mine," Wolfe said. Kelvin blinked. "Yours? I created that paprika blend in 1973. Your cart used it." There was a silence. Heavy. Real. Kelvin swallowed. "I didn't mean harm. I wanted to know if it was real. If someone still cared about flavors." "You broke into my kitchen," Wolfe said. "To find integrity." Kelvin nodded. Merritt stood. "This is ridiculous. He's unstable." "Sit down," Wolfe said coldly. "You're the unstable one." That stopped the room. Wolfe's voice softened. "The sabotage wasn't about you, Dr. Merritt. It was about ownership, identity, recognition, and what happens when credit is denied." He looked at Max. "Shall we discuss your bank transfers?" Max went white. No," Wolfe said. "You paid for the cart. You encouraged Kelvin. You thought you were making a point about branding. But he made art. You wanted petty revenge. He wanted revolution." Silence. Then Wolfe leaned back. "This case is closed. But whether you seek restitution, forgiveness, or fame, that is your affair." He looked at Fritz, who stood by the door, arms folded. "Fritz," he said, "please remove the spice jar and burn the contents. The thing about pressure is, you never really notice it until something starts to creak. And at Wolfe's brownstone, creaking isn't just physical, it's psychological." After the impromptu inquisition, most of our guests had cleared out with the speed of people trying to avoid appearing guilty by proximity. Kelvin had vanished, leaving a faint smell of guilt and paprika behind him. Max left without a word, eyes twitching, face pale. Shira offered an apologetic nod as she walked out. Merritt looked ready to sue someone or cry into his blazer, possibly both. Only Lucia stayed behind. She lingered in the front hall, arms crossed, looking at the floor tiles like they might rearrange themselves into an answer. I stepped out to join her. "Something on your mind?" I asked. She didn't look up. "He's not wrong, you know. Wolfe rarely is. But it helps to know which he we're talking about." "Kelvin," she said, "and maybe Wolfe too. He cared more about the product than any of us. Merritt just wanted press. Max wanted capital. I wanted recognition. But Kelvin, he wanted the dog to sing." I raised an eyebrow. "That's poetic," she smirked. "I used to think flavor was science. Kelvin reminded me it's art. He didn't just replicate my work, he made it better." "Then why let Max use him as a pawn?" She sighed. "I didn't know. Not at first. Max told me Kelvin was freelancing, doing recipe tests for a food truck project. I thought it was his way back into the industry. I figured, why not let him play?" "Because someone's been playing with poison," I said. She looked up sharply. "What?" "Not literal. Yet. But this whole mess, fake cart, mirrored menu, invasion of the brownstone. Wolfe doesn't call that competition. He calls it war." Lucia nodded once quietly. "Tell him I'm sorry for the spice jar. Kelvin didn't mean disrespect." "He'll be pleased to hear that," I said, "right after he finishes burning it." Back in the office, Wolfe had resumed his preferred position, seated, still and slightly contemptuous of gravity. "Well?" he asked. She stayed behind to deliver regret, I said. Also sympathy, maybe even sincerity. Pfui, Wolfe muttered. Emotions are acceptable in chefs, less so in saboteurs. I believe her, I said. Lucia knew about the cart, maybe even helped indirectly, but Max ran the show. She's cleaning her conscience, not hiding a motive. That is your conclusion? That is my read, I said. You want more than that. Call in a medium. Wolfe snorted. Mr. Panzer has provided further details. That got my attention. What kind? Payments. Kelvin's cart supplier was paid not only by Max Hollow, but through a third account, untraceable at first glance. But Mr. Panzer, being resourceful, has now connected it to a subsidiary of Jasper Lang Associates. I blinked. Lang, as in Shira Lang. Wolfe gave the faintest of nods. Her name was on a promotional budget request 5 weeks ago, buried in innocuous language. Guerrilla brand pressure test. Well, I'll be... Yes, Wolfe said. Miss Lang knew. That means she helped fund the ghost cart. Correct. Whether wittingly or under suggestion, she is implicated. And that changes the circle of suspects. Wolfe steepled his fingers. It completes it. But Max was the ringleader. Max was the instigator. Miss Lang is the amplifier, and Kelvin, of course, is the soul. You think she knew how far it would go? Wolfe tilted his head. Let us find out. That afternoon I took a ride down to Jasper Lang Associates, a sleek glass and chrome box nestled between a Pilates studio and a men's grooming spa that probably charged more for beard oil than I make in a week. Inside, the place was all muted colors and tasteful anxiety. Shira was waiting in a side office, tapping a pencil against a legal pad. When I came in, she smiled, tired. Mr. Goodwin, I was expecting you. Good instincts, I said. You always file expenses in code? She tensed barely. Depends on the campaign. What was this one called? She hesitated, then answered, Mirror Dog. I gave a low whistle. So you knew? I knew the theory, she said. Max came to me with the concept, said it was a disruptive PR move, a way to shake up expectations, get people talking, and Kelvin. I didn't know he was involved until it launched. By then, Max was running the budget, and Merritt was threatening to fire anyone who said brand fatigue twice in a sentence. But you didn't. Stop it, she met my eyes. Can I be honest? Please, I didn't want to stop it. Merritt's ego needed puncturing, and I figured it would blow over. A weird cart, some food blogger buzz, then we'd pivot. But instead it kept going. Because the food was good, she said, as if admitting a sin. Too good. Suddenly, people were lining up not because it was free, but because it tasted like a memory, like something that meant something. I studied her. That sounds like more than marketing. She looked away. Kelvin's food made people feel. That's rare. I knew it would bite us. I just didn't know how. I stood. Well, now you do, and so does Wolfe. She swallowed. Are we going to be arrested? Depends. On what? On whether this ends with mustard or murder. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had gone. To the orchids, leaving me alone in the office with Fritz, who was carefully sanitizing the spice shelf like it had contracted the plague. By evening, Wolfe returned, lowered himself into the chair and told me to call the police. You think it's criminal. It is fraudulent, malicious, and technically assault by reputation. But more importantly, I believe the cart is no longer simply symbolic. What do you mean? He looked at me. I mean, Mr. Goodwin, that if we do not act, someone will escalate. This is no longer a case of sabotage. It is on the verge of violence. The phone rang. I picked it up. It was Saul. There was a break-in, he said. Dr. Dog, last night, kitchen raided, nothing stolen, but one thing left behind. What? A hot dog, wrapped, sitting on the executive desk, drenched in black vinegar. I blinked. Message? Yeah, Saul said. "It was stabbed with a skewer through the center." I turned to Wolfe. He nodded slowly. "It begins. Wolfe once said that murder is merely the bluntest expression of a failure in imagination. Sabotage, on the other hand, requires wit, and when wit festers, it turns into something far more corrosive. The vinegar-drenched hot dog skewered like a voodoo doll on Merritt's desk wasn't just a prank. It was theater. Intentional, targeted, and meant to humiliate. Wolfe had called it, and the escalation had begun. We were no longer dancing around branding disputes. We were circling something sharper. The next morning I found Wolfe in the plant room earlier than usual, lecturing Fritz on the mishandling of a delicate Masdevallia hybrid. When he returned to the office, he didn't sit immediately. He stood by the window with his back to me. "Someone," he said, "has lost control." "Kelvin?" "No," Wolfe said. "Kelvin is the artisan. He created the flavor. He wanted vindication, not destruction. This recent display, this vinegar desecration, is not his language." "Max?" "Possible, but if so, it was born of panic, not design. The cart brought notoriety. Now it brings liability. Someone is trying to push this thing to collapse before blame lands on them. And you want to make sure it does?" "Precisely." He turned, stepped heavily to his chair, and settled in like a battleship returning to port. "Archie, we'll make 3 calls." I opened my notebook. "Hit me." "First, Mr. Panzer. I want eyes on Shira Lang, round the clock. She is the only suspect with direct access to both Merritt's finances and the campaign's digital infrastructure." "Done." "Second, Mr. Kramer." I paused. "You want to involve Inspector Kramer now?" Wolfe lifted a brow. "I do not want to. I must. A criminal act has occurred, and if we do not offer something to the authorities, they will insert themselves. Uninvited, likely with their usual enthusiasm and lack of grace. You're afraid they'll trample the flower?" "Exactly. And the third call?" He looked at me with flat calm. "Invite everyone back. This evening. Office, 8 o'clock. "The whole chorus?" "Yes. And Archie, this time, ensure they come." The hours that followed were chess, and Wolfe was a grandmaster in velvet slippers. Saul had already compiled a dossier of Shira's corporate activity. Nothing illegal, but a series of marketing black ops projects that pushed ethical boundaries like a drunk at a revolving door. At least one of them bore uncanny resemblance to the ghost cart. Meanwhile, I followed up with Merritt, who had grown as jumpy as a frog on hot asphalt. He barked at me over the phone, demanding answers and threatening to fire people he wasn't technically paying. When I told him Wolfe expected him at the brownstone, he huffed, said something about lawyers, and hung up. But he'd be there. Vanity always trumps fear. Max, as expected, tried to weasel out. "I'm in Connecticut," he claimed. "No, you're in Soho," I said. "And if you don't show up tonight, Wolfe will turn this case over to Kramer, and you're nice passive-aggressive. Sabotage will become criminal conspiracy." He showed up. Lucia didn't argue. She sounded tired but firm. "I'll be there. I want it done." Kelvin was harder to pin. I had to go back to his apartment. He opened the door, this time looking like he hadn't eaten in a day, and had been living on guilt and guilt alone. "Why should I come back?" he asked. "Because you need to be in the room when Wolfe puts this thing down. And because, if you're not, people might decide you're the one holding the knife." He nodded. "Slowly. I'll come. 8 o'clock sharp." The suspects filed in like characters in a whodunit, with one too many secrets. Lucia sat stiff and silent. Shira arrived alone and looked like she hadn't slept. Max showed up in a coat that screamed reasonable doubt and kept his eyes low. Kelvin came in last, visibly shaking. Merritt was already pacing the office rug by then, demanding action and resolution like a man who thinks shouting is the same thing as justice. Wolfe sat, silent. The room buzzed with static tension. Wolfe didn't open with questions, he opened with silence, a long one. It stretched past discomfort into raw psychological dissection. Then calmly Wolfe began. "Mr. Merritt," he said, "do you recall the term culinary authorship?" Merritt stopped pacing. "What?" "It's the notion," Wolfe continued, "that food, distinctive, original food, is not merely prepared but authored. As a composer authors a symphony, it is not merely the ingredients but the composition, the balance, the voice." Merritt sneered. "And what does that have to do with this lunatic circus?" "Everything," Wolfe said, "because the author was not you." The room went still. "Kelvin Trask," Wolfe said, "authored the flavor you built your empire on. Quietly, competently, and uncredited." "That's a lie." "It is not," Wolfe said, cutting him off. "Your executive chef confirms it. Your marketing director confirms it. And your former intern, in a moment of desperation and candor, confessed it." Merritt's face turned volcanic. "That little thief—" "No, not thief," Wolfe said. "He wanted to be recognized. Instead, he was dismissed. Max Hollow saw an opportunity to weaponize his talent. Shira Lang, knowingly or not, funded. And now, because the scheme has spiraled out of control, you have each begun sabotaging each other." Max shifted. "I never touched his office." "Indeed," Wolfe said, "because you had no need. But someone did." He turned. "Miss Lang, you had keys to the restaurant. Hand access to the building after hours." Her mouth opened, closed. Then, softly, "It wasn't supposed to go this far." "But it did," Wolfe said. "You wanted to scare him. Leave a mark. Instead, you invited chaos." She looked down. Wolfe turned again. "And you, Mr. Hollow, you funded the cart. Used Kelvin's genius as your fire, but when the heat grew too hot, you panicked. Paid a courier to deliver that vinegar-soaked dog. A threat, a warning, possibly a betrayal." Max flinched. "You can't prove that." "No," Wolfe said, "but Mr. Panzer can." I stepped forward, placed a slim manila folder on the desk. "Photos, courier drop, surveillance footage, time-stamped payments." Max swallowed, hard. Kelvin was staring at the floor. "It got out of hand," he murmured. Wolfe's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Revenge always does." A long pause. Then Wolfe sat back, steepling his fingers. "I have no appetite for litigation, but I detest disorder. Mr. Merritt, you may pursue legal remedy or you may settle quietly. Acknowledge your sources, pay your debts, and disband this foolish charade." Merritt was red, but silent. Wolfe turned to the group. "This experiment in ego, sabotage, and sensation is over. There will be no more hot dog hauntings." He closed his eyes. "I insist." And just like that, it was done. If you ever want to see a room deflate without popping, put 5 guilty people in it and have Nero Wolfe pronounce sentence without raising his voice. That's what happened after Wolfe laid out the whole game. Board. Each move, each player, and each double cross stacked in an unflinching column of logic. The funny thing? Nobody argued. Not really. The silence in the room was the kind that follows a storm. Not calm, not relief, but shell-shocked acquiescence. Everyone had tried their hand at strategy, and Wolfe had checkmated them without lifting more than a finger and a phone call. Kelvin Trask looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. He kept his eyes on the rug, as if Wolfe's Persian pattern could save him from guilt by geometrical osmosis. Wolfe, for his part, regarded the young man without animosity. "Mr. Trask," he said finally, "your culinary acumen is not in dispute, nor is your passion. But you allowed your principles to become weaponized." Kelvin flinched. "You lent your talent to petty grievances. Worse, you allowed your name to be hidden behind others. I will not scold you for your youth, but I will warn you, do not waste your gift again. Create honestly or do not create at all." Kelvin looked up. I didn't mean for it to go that far. You rarely do, Wolfe said. That's why. It's called escalation. Merritt stood next, pacing now with a different kind of energy, one born of humiliation finally catching up to him. The man's pride had taken more hits than a piñata at a banker's birthday. You're telling me, he said slowly, that my partner funded a sabotage campaign using my own intern, with help from my marketing head, and nobody thought to warn me? Lucia, arms folded, didn't answer. Neither did Shira. Wolfe sighed. You cultivated a culture of dismissal, Dr. Merritt. No one warned you because no one trusted you would listen. Shira finally spoke, voice quiet. He's right. Merritt rounded on her, but she cut him off with a look that could slice salami. I tried. More than once. You didn't want to hear it. You wanted applause. And when people like Kelvin came to you with ideas, you shut them down. Lucia nodded. We were building something, but you wanted a product, not a passion. Pfui, Wolfe muttered, softly but firmly. That got everyone's attention. This is not group therapy, he said. Mr. Goodwin, if you please, summarize the facts. I stepped forward with my notes. Right, here's the short of it. Kelvin developed a gourmet recipe system while working for Merritt, including tweaks that elevated it beyond what Merritt or Lucia had finalized. Merritt never acknowledged that. Kelvin was fired after being caught documenting his work, likely out of fear, not deceit. Max Hollow, Merritt's partner, saw an opportunity. He financed a ghost cart using Kelvin's ideas as a backdoor attack on Merritt's ego and control. Shira Lang, knowingly or not, facilitated funding through coded marketing initiatives under the label Mirror Dog. She believed the campaign would apply pressure. Instead, it detonated the entire enterprise. When public reaction grew beyond what Max could control, and Kelvin's food became the story rather than the spectacle, panic set in. The vinegar dog on Merritt's desk was meant to intimidate him into silence. Whether that was Max or a panic play by Shira is debatable. Either way, the message was sent. Max made a small sound, whether of protest or regret, I couldn't tell. He stood, shoved his hands in his coat pockets and stared at the bookshelf. You know what the real joke is, he said. None of it worked. The cart worked. People loved it. Kelvin's food? It was the only thing in this circus that was real. Wolfe nodded. Yes. And that is precisely why you lost control of it. Merritt turned to Kelvin. If you wanted recognition, why not just come to me? Kelvin laughed bitterly. I did. You told me to stay in my lane. I wasn't trying to steal anything. I wanted someone to taste what I made and know, not because it had your name stamped on it, but because it was mine. Wolfe cleared his throat. This discussion is, for now, academic. Mr. Kramer will arrive in 20 minutes. I've informed him that a malicious campaign of business sabotage and property interference has occurred. He will want statements. That jolted them. Charges, Max asked. Unlikely, Wolfe said, unless Dr. Merritt insists. All eyes turned to Merritt. He hesitated, then deflated. No, he said. No police. Not if the cart is gone. Not if this stops here. He looked at Wolfe. You'll see to that? Wolfe inclined his head. I already have. Mr. Panzer delivered a cease and desist to the vendor this morning. The cart will not return. And Kelvin? Wolfe looked at the young man. He may leave freely, though I suggest strongly that he reconsider the merits of lawful employment. Kelvin gave a small, broken smile. I think I'm done with ghosts. By 9:30 they were gone. Shira was the last to leave. She paused at the door, turned and said, For what it's worth, you were right. Wolfe didn't reply. Only when the door clicked shut did he finally exhale. I stepped forward, poured him a glass of beer from the chilled cabinet behind the globe, and handed it over. He took it with his usual non-committal grunt. You didn't have to take the case, I said. I did, Wolfe said, because someone trespassed, first with flavor, then with fear, and finally with vinegar. He sipped, eyes closed, considering. I detest vinegar. On hot dogs or in business? Both. Inspector Kramer arrived at 9:48 p.m. sharp, carrying a disposition like he'd been interrupted mid-cigar, and was looking to take it out on someone. The brim of his hat was slightly rain-speckled, and his overcoat had a stubborn crease that said he'd been sitting in an unmarked sedan longer than he liked. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. He just gave a curt nod from his chair as Kramer marched into the office and dropped his notepad onto the edge of the desk. "All right, Wolfe. I'm here, let's have it." Wolfe gestured toward the red chair. "Please, Inspector, sit." Kramer didn't. He stood like a statue that disapproved of furniture. I get a call saying you've got a case of commercial sabotage with intent to intimidate. You use words like malicious interference and strategic culinary fraud. So, where's the crime? "In the execution," Wolfe said, "and in the aftermath." Kramer turned to me. "You want to translate that?" I stood beside the desk, flipping open my notes like a man about to present an invoice of misdeeds. "Kramer, you've got half a dozen people involved in what started as a petty marketing stunt and spiraled into full-blown psychological warfare. Max Hollow funded an illegal hot dog cart to sabotage his own partner's business. Shira Lang laundered budget money to help launch it. The cart itself distributed near-identical versions of Dr. Merritt's proprietary menu, for free, directly, outside his restaurant. Kramer's eyes narrowed. And, I said, when the campaign didn't implode fast enough, someone decided to escalate. We're talking threats, veiled, theatrical ones, including a vinegar-soaked dog stabbed through the heart of Merritt's reputation and left on his office desk. The implication being, "Shut up, or this gets messier," Wolfe interjected. The act was symbolic, but the intent was explicit, to suppress consequences through intimidation. Kramer turned his steely gaze back to Wolfe. "You saying someone threatened his life over sausages?" "No," Wolfe said. "His identity." Kramer's frown deepened. "I need something actionable. What about that intern, the kid who made the recipes?" "Kelvin Trask," I said. "He's complicit, but more pawn than player. He developed the recipes, yes, but it was Max Hollow who paid for the cart, engineered the sabotage, and, when the plan drew attention, hired a courier to deliver the threat." "Courier?" "We have photographs," Wolfe said, motioning, to a folder on the desk. "Mr. Panzer's work." Kramer stepped forward, flipped through the file, and grunted. "Hell of a story." Wolfe sipped his beer. "It's not a story. It's a confession, spread across emails, bank statements, and ambition." "Any reason you didn't call me before you resolved it?" Wolfe gave him a look that could have chilled butter. "Because, Inspector, I prefer cases to be coherent before they are criminal." Kramer muttered something about goddamn eggheads and started writing. "So, charges." "That depends," Wolfe said, "on whether Dr. Merritt wishes to pursue them. He still might," I added, "but at the moment his appetite for revenge is lower than his blood pressure." Kramer tucked the folder under his arm. "If this were anyone else, Wolfe—" "But it is not." "No," he admitted, "it's not." He stood there a second longer, as if debating whether to throw in a threat or a thank you. In the end, he settled for the door. "I'll file the incident, and I'll warn them off. But if this flares up again, I'll be back." "You're always welcome," Wolfe said, without an ounce of sincerity. When the door shut behind him, Wolfe exhaled. Finally, I gave him a look. "You knew it would be Max?" He shook his head. "I suspected, but I needed motive." "You had revenge. I needed specificity." Kelvin had the skill, Max had the money, Shira had the platform. Only Max had the desperation. He had lost control of the business, the narrative, and finally, the cart itself. The moment the cart drew praise rather than scandal, Max feared being erased from his own story. And so he doubled down. "Yes," Wolfe said, in the most cowardly way. I sat back, folding my arms. "You really think Kelvin's going to be okay?" "He will cook," Wolfe said. "That will save him." "What about Merritt?" "He will rebrand, likely as a victim of his own genius. America forgives failure more quickly than fraud. And Max will vanish from polite society, and Miss Lang will spend a year rebuilding her career and her conscience." He finished the last sip of beer, set the glass down gently. "I find the entire affair distasteful." "Because of the vinegar?" "Because of the waste," Wolfe said. "So much cleverness spent on sabotage when they could have simply cooked." Later that evening, the brownstone was silent again. Fritz had prepared a late dinner, veal medallions with polenta and sautéed fennel. Wolfe ate slowly, thoughtfully, like each bite was a question answered. I sipped my coffee, watching the light from the dining room chandelier reflect off the cutlery. The storm had passed. No more cursed hot dogs. No more spice tampering. Just peace, food, and the rustle of Fritz in the kitchen. Wolfe dabbed his lips and leaned back. "Archie," he said, "there is a lesson here." I was afraid of that. "It is this. The most dangerous ghosts are not of the dead, but of the ignored, the dismissed, the unacknowledged." I raised my cup in mock salute. "To the haunted hot dog," he frowned. "To intellectual justice," I corrected. He inclined his head. "That will do." The brownstone once again was quiet. It always amazed me how fast peace returns to a place like ours. After the shouting and posturing, the late-night revelations and verbal vivisections, the place resets like nothing ever happened. The rug looks the same. The chairs sit undisturbed. Wolfe returns to his orchids. I return to my typewriter. And Fritz, our saint of the skillet, makes sure no emotional debris ends up on the dinner plate. By the next evening, the whole thing was already starting to feel like an absurd culinary dream. There were no more visitors, no mysterious hot dog deliveries, no vinegar-soaked threats. Just the usual flow of Wolfe's strict routine and my ongoing attempts to keep things semi-normal in a household where normal had a very specific, orchid-scented definition. Wolfe, of course, had wasted no time restoring the sanctity of his kitchen. The moment Fritz finished reordering the spice rack, paprika replaced, black cardamom reweighed, a full inventory done, Wolfe performed what he called a cleansing inspection. I called it a control freak in full bloom. But in this house, ritual matters. It says, "We endured intrusion and now it is gone." The silence lingered for a day and a half before Wolfe finally addressed the elephant in the brownstone. "Have we heard from Mr. Merritt?" he asked one evening, his voice drifting into the office from the dining room. "Not directly," I said, swiveling in my chair, "but a press release hit this afternoon. Dr. Dog to close temporarily for brand re-evaluation and structural reorganization. He's probably in a dark room, spinning a PR redemption narrative, likely one where he's the misunderstood genius betrayed by his inner circle. Correct. My money's on a podcast interview within 2 weeks." Wolfe grunted. "He will survive. They all will," he added. "Even Max?" "Max will fade. He will not vanish. Men like him don't disappear. They dilute, appear years later." At some branding summit in a hotel ballroom, peddling buzzwords like experiential authenticity, while claiming he once reinvented the American hot dog. "Kelvin?" Wolfe paused. I made a phone call. That made me sit up. To whom? To a former client. Chef-owned establishment in Astoria. High standards. Low tolerance for nonsense. They agreed to speak with him. Your matchmaking. "Now?" "I abhor waste," Wolfe said. "The boy has talent, misused, yes, but raw. In the right kitchen, with the right structure, he may learn to season before he flames." That was as close as Wolfe ever came to charity, or hope. What about Shira Lang? I asked. She will pivot. Women like her always do. She is intelligent, capable, and morally elastic, but not evil. She will find her next campaign. She may even learn restraint. And Lucia? Lucia will open her own place. Quiet, focused, sincere. And she will never again let someone else own her palate. It wasn't just a summation. It was closure. Wolfe style. Clinical but not cold. Observant, unsentimental. Which, coming from him, was practically a blessing. As for me, I'd spent the better part of the day cleaning up notes and logging Saul's receipts. 1 courier, 2 surveillance, days. A folder of wire transfers and digital breadcrumbs Wolfe had barely glanced at before solving the thing with 1 scathing paragraph and a condescending nod. I looked over at the bookshelf. On the top shelf, under a bust of Voltaire, sat the cloche that once contained the famous ghost dog. Fritz had cleaned it, sanitized it, and sealed it again. Wolfe insisted it remain empty, a glass memorial to misused brilliance. I have a theory, I said aloud, just to see if Wolfe was listening. He was. Kelvin didn't tamper with your spice rack to send a message. Not really. He didn't come here to threaten. He came here to confirm. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. He wanted to know if his palate matched yours, if his spice, his invention, stood up to the man with the most disciplined tongue in New York. Wolfe didn't answer immediately. Then, and it did. He didn't just want revenge. He wanted recognition. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment. Which is why he was so easily exploited. And why you gave him a second chance? No, Wolfe said. I do not give chances. I recognize inevitabilities, and if someone is fated to cook, they must be placed where their work harms no one. That sounds almost noble. It is practical, he replied, reaching for his beer. There is no virtue in allowing untamed talent to ferment in resentment. Dinner that night was simple. Beef bourguignon with pearl onions and rosemary. Bread, followed by a vanilla custard with orange peel. Fritz, sensing the mood, said nothing. Wolfe barely spoke, except to comment on the texture of the meat and the regrettable scarcity of decent burgundy in modern shops. Afterward, we returned to the office. Wolfe settled in with a book of essays by Montaigne, and I leaned back with the evening edition. Halfway through an article about zoning disputes in Brooklyn, Wolfe spoke again. Archie. Yeah? There is one aspect of this affair that troubles me. I looked over. Just one? Yes. He steepled his fingers. Why did they call it haunted? I blinked. The cart. The blog coverage, the hashtags, the reviews. Why haunted? The cart didn't appear overnight. It wasn't spectral. There was no phantom. And yet the public imagination demanded a ghost. I thought about it. Because the story was bigger than the food, I said. Because no one wants to believe in sabotage for profit. They want something romantic, something dramatic. A ghost makes it feel poetic. Wolfe nodded, slowly. Yes. But poetry is dangerous in commerce. It obscures motive. It sells hot dogs, though, Wolfe grunted. Tragic. He reached for his book again, then paused. And yet... What? He looked up, eyes calm, voice soft. Perhaps every dish well-made and deeply felt is haunted. By the cook's intention, by the eater's memory, by the moment of creation. What is flavor if not the ghost of a thing once whole? I blinked. That was as philosophical as I'd ever heard him get, without immediately mocking himself. I'm writing that down, I said. Don't, he muttered, returning to his book. It was an indulgence. I smiled, leaned back, and let the quiet settle. The haunted hot dog had come and gone. The case was closed. The brownstone, once disturbed, was still again. Outside, New York rattled and steamed and hustled, but inside peace had returned, Dinner was done. Justice of a sort had been served, and somewhere out there in a quiet kitchen, a young man was preparing a new dish, seasoned not with resentment, but with restraint. You could say the haunted hot dog case ended not with a bang, but with a burp, an unceremonious release of pressure after days of secrets, sabotage, and spice. But with Wolfe, there are no dramatic fireworks. No arrests in the rain, no chase scenes, no rooftop monologues. Just truth, unearthed like a truffle and served cold. The following Monday, I found Wolfe in his chair, of course, hands folded, eyes half closed, his thoughts presumably off tangoing with 17th century philosophers, or the fine distinctions between two types of fennel pollen. It was, by all accounts, a normal morning. "Any word from Kelvin?" I asked, handing him the morning mail. "Yes," he replied without looking up. "Fritz received a postcard, a brief note of thanks. He begins work tomorrow." "At the place in Astoria?" Wolfe nodded. "A modest kitchen, high standards, limited nonsense, ideal for atonement." I sat sipping my coffee, feeling the closure settle in. The storm had passed. Max Hollow had slithered out of the spotlight and into a self-imposed sabbatical. Merritt had started running paid ads in culinary magazines that were half confession, half rebranding campaign. Integrity, innovation, reborn. He was giving the public the redemption arc they craved, and it was working barely. As for Shira Lang, she had tendered her resignation from Jasper Lang Associates and launched her own boutique strategy firm. Her new tagline: "The real flavor of narrative." Wolfe read it aloud once, then made a sound like someone had served him canned pesto. I leaned back, propping one ankle on my knee. "So what was it really about, Wolfe?" He finally opened his eyes. "Credit." "Credit?" "Yes," he said. "The oldest and most undervalued currency in human affairs. Not money, not fame. Credit, acknowledgement of authorship, of origin, of truth." He reached for the beer Fritz had brought in precisely 5 minutes prior, still cold, still foaming at the lip of the glass. Kelvin made something extraordinary. He wanted someone to say so. Merritt refused. Hollow saw a weapon. Shira saw a strategy. What began as genius became gossip. That is always the danger with flavor. Because people want to steal it? No, Wolfe said. Because people want to own it. But flavor, Mr. Goodwin, like truth, cannot be owned. It can only be revealed. He took a sip and closed his eyes again, apparently finished. I sat a moment, letting that stew. "So what's next?" I asked. "Another stubborn chef?" "A haunted cheese wheel." Wolfe raised one brow. "You may enjoy your dramatics, Archie," he said, "but I prefer cases without condiments." I grinned. Spoken like a man who still hasn't forgiven that vinegar stunt. "I will never forgive vinegar," he replied, eyes still closed. A minute passed, then, in the kind of voice you only use when you're sure no one else is listening, he said, "Though it was an excellent hot dog, I nearly choked on my coffee."